Are we? Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. I'm Terry Madonna. Well, as you watch this program, it will be on the eve of Christmas, and for those of you who celebrate it, have a great one, as well as those of you who celebrate Hanukkah and Kwanzaa, have a great holiday season. Let's get to it.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we're going to skip the normal political fare on the program in this holiday season, and I think we have some pretty good news. First of all, you're going to be traveling a lot, and we have good news on the roads and, as they say, the byways and the highways in the state of Pennsylvania. We'll do that in a moment. But first, energy prices are not as bad as they have been, maybe not as good. And I'm looking across the table from me at Terry Fitzpatrick. He's the president and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, a former PUC, Pennsylvania Utilities Commissioner. He's our expert. We're getting in here from time to time to talk about all things energy. All right, on balance, and remember, we're buying gasoline. We're doing what? We're using electricity and gas, and in some cases still coal.
Correct.
Right, to heat our homes. What's the good news?
Well, overall, it's certainly a very good story, I think. Pennsylvania is an energy powerhouse.
Yeah.
With the new supplies of gas from the Marcellus Shale, as well as our traditional resource of coal. We're the second biggest nuclear generating state in the country. So, and renewables are making inroads as well. So it's certainly a good story, abundant supplies. Prices are relatively low. They go up and down with the market.
Sure.
But if you go back a decade, energy prices are much lower than they were back then. So from a consumer standpoint, certainly a very good story.
Yeah. So it's obvious, and this is sort of a no-brainer. I think we learned this in freshman economics. If, in fact, we have a lot of supply and demand is, relatively consistent to the supply, what happens? The price does what?
That's correct.
Go down. And so what you're basically saying is that the mix of energy is good for the consumer, that, consumers have to consume energy, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It probably, especially the biggest impact, or one of the biggest impacts for customers who use natural gas to heat their homes. The prices are much better than they were a decade ago. And that has a lot of social impacts. I mean, it affects our economy, but for people who struggle, who live paycheck to paycheck, maybe struggle to pay their bills, those lower prices are really a godsend.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are folks who, because of their income, obviously need assistance. And we do have programs. They're federal as well as state programs, but what strikes you as the most important?
Well, I think probably the two biggest I would focus on. There's a federal program, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP as it's called. That's federal money that comes into the state, but probably an even bigger source of assistance are the programs that are funded within the utilities customers, the so-called universal service programs. There's probably about double the amount of money in those. For people who can't afford to pay the regular price that everybody else pays, they're put on a discounted price to try to keep them on the system. So, and there's roughly, I think the most recent year, there's almost $400 million put into that. So it's a very large amount of money that goes into those assistance programs.
And have they been affected by this raging debate that we have both in Congress and in the state legislature over budgets and cutbacks? Have they been relatively stable?
They've been relatively stable, and they change as the need changes. That's not funded each year by the legislature. Their programs were delegated to the PUC for oversight there, so it's something that goes on between the PUC and the utilities.
Yeah. I want to, when you come back on the next segment, I want to get into more detail about nuclear power and the big debate about what's going to happen to 3 Mile Island. We're taping within I used to say a Tiger Woods golf shot, but he's back on the tour now, right? So we're not that far away, as you know.
Right.
But if we look at some other aspects of energy that are in the news, we have coal. What's the latest on coal?
Well, coal's still around. I mean, President Trump has made a big point that he wants to revive coal. Coal's challenges, there's two challenges for coal. One is environmental. With the focus on climate change, there's more emissions for burning coal than there is for natural gas. The other thing is just the basic economic reality that with all these gas supplies that have come in, it's gained a competitive edge over coal. So both of those things are at work.
Yeah. All right, well, let's run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about nuclear, what you think is going to happen. Natural gas, there's this recurring debate over whether or not it should be taxed or not, and then we'll get into electricity. As you sit there at home, one of those forms of energy supplies your heating. I think I use electric. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Talking with Terry Fitzpatrick. He's the CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. We're talking about all things energy. We chatted a bit about coal. Let's talk about nuclear. It's a bit controversial. Let's be honest about it. 3 Mile Island, they're talking about selling it, closing it. What's going on with that?
Well, there is an ongoing debate, as you said, and it's happening both at the federal and at the state level. Certain states, in order to keep the nuclear power plants open, have provided some support or some subsidies, some would say, to those plants, and that's happened in New York and in Illinois. I think it's being debated in New Jersey right now. Yeah. The issue's been raised here. There hasn't been a bill introduced yet, but there's also a debate going on at the federal level. The Department of Energy has made a proposal to provide some additional support for both nuclear and for coal plants to try to keep them going. So there's a big debate about what we need to do to keep the grid reliable, to maintain reliable sources of energy and what that means. That supplies
a good bit of the power in Pennsylvania to industries and homes. Is that correct?
Correct. That's correct.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So there'd have to be a suitable replacement online, as they say. Am I right or wrong about that?
No, that's part of it, yes. And also with nuclear, particularly, there's emphasis of the fact that there's no carbon dioxide emissions associated with nuclear. Point. And of course, for the local communities where these plants are located, you can understand the concern that comes on there. But what's best for the public interest generally, it's a hard question. There's a lot of debate about it.
Now, as we know, natural gas continues to be a significant part of the economy of our state. It's also, as you know, controversial. Correct. The deep well, the fracking as it's called, there's been a debate over taxing it. Governor Wolf has proposed what they call a severance tax. That's a tax on the amount of natural gas that's extracted, cubic feet that's extracted. So far, the legislature, led by Republicans in most cases, have said, no, we're not going to do it, and they haven't done it. Right. So what's the future for natural gas?
Well, I think it has a bright future, but as you said, there's controversy there too. There's a question of taxing it. Now, they do pay an impact fee. Some want to put a severance tax on top of that as well. But with gas, it's cleaner than coal, but some people still say it's not clean enough. So you have the keep it in the ground movement, which is fighting some of the pipelines. So there's always controversies with energy, Terry. It's a complicated picture.
No, I think you're right. Now, when we get to these alternative forms of energy, is the problem that they're just not, at the moment, ready to replace, the forms of energy that we're talking about now, coal and nuclear and gas, that they're just not, fiscally, financially, when you take all of those, is that the fundamental problem?
Well, that's yet another area of debate. There are some.
Why we have you here?
Correct. Well, there are some people who say that we could power our whole system, our whole electric grid on renewables. I don't think that's the majority view, and frankly, I don't agree with that either. I don't think they're intermittent. They generate electricity when the wind's blowing or the sun is shining. But our need for electricity doesn't depend on that. We often need it when those things aren't available. We can't really store electricity too well on a very large scale, or at least it's not economic to do that. So I think the biggest thing that we need is I think we need innovation. I think we need to make more investments in research to come up with the cleaner technologies we're going to need.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you, I think in general, energy usage, and you've pointed this out before, isn't growing very much despite the fact that there's a growth in the economy. And that's unusual. That's not historic.
Correct.
Explain that. What's that about?
Well, I think it used to be that as the economy would grow, energy usage would grow right along with it. But now we're finding that those things are decoupled, so to speak, so that even as the economy grows, our energy usage doesn't increase much. And that's because of, I think, of the conservation ethic which has come about, and I think just economically, a lot of companies have moved to save energy there. So because we don't see that growth in usage anymore, the companies that I represent are trying to decouple rates so that we're not dependent to recover the cost of our systems on customers using more energy. So that's something we're working on.
Yeah, that's an important point. I mean, and we are, as you accurately point out, a big energy producing state. We've always been, well, since the late 19th century, energy has been, and a big employer. And we've got this complex of energy sources. We're not literally relying on one source. In some ways, that's a strength, even though there is a controversial aspect to it with the environmental and the emissions, correct?
Correct. That's absolutely correct.
All right. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in. This is a great update. Coming up, Bob Latham joins us. He's our expert on transportation. I know you're going to do a lot of traveling. We'll see how safe it is out there. Bob will help us out.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Well, welcome back to the program. Our expert on all things related to roads and bridges and transportation, Bob Latham, joins us. He's the Executive Vice President of the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. They do all this road and bridge construction. We see those men and women all over the place, don't we?
Well, we're going to take a break for the holidays.
Oh, well, good.
Merry Christmas and happy holidays to you.
Same to you. All right. Now, we've been talking about this for the last several years, about how badly needed bridge repairs and maintenance, road repairs and maintenance, and the backlog was enormous until a piece of legislation was passed a few years ago known as Act 89. We'll try to stay away from the Act numbers. So what's going on with the deterioration of our whole transportation network?
Well, everybody wanted to know when we passed this transportation bill, and obviously we increased a number of taxes, a number of fees on consumers and on motorists. All right, are you going to spend this money wisely or not? Are you going to make, what accomplishments are we going to see? And I'm really happy to say we now have some statistics that I think will be very impressive to people. When we started talking about this several years ago, our bridge backlog, 6,000 bad bridges in Pennsylvania, we call them structurally deficient. That has been cut in half.
Wow.
So we're down to now 3,000. That's still 3,000 too many, but we're working off that backlog. We're no longer number one in the country, so we're seeing those results. We're seeing a shoring up of our bridges, and we have more bridges in this state, by the way, just as a reminder, than any other state in the country.
Now, I want you to get this. I mean, struck, every time I hear this, I go, wow, more bridges, finish the thought, more bridges.
Than any other state in the country.
I mean,
and we had the
almost
highest
hard to
number of
believe.
bad bridges, obviously, but now we no longer have that high number. And we've also cut that inventory from 6,000 to 3,000. So we're really working them off as a result of the money that the PennDOT is putting into fixing roads and bridges.
So what you're saying is we've got to continue to be patient. I know we all go through this when we're lined up waiting to get over, a 2 lanes or a 4 lanes. It's now been down to 1 lane or 2 lanes. And we've got to remember that this is important work that's being done and to have a little more patience, right?
Well, exactly. And it also, just a reminder, it puts money back into the economy. Remember that work, that design work, the engineering work and the construction work are done by private companies. So this is private industry that is involved in fixing and upgrading our infrastructure and our transportation highway system in Pennsylvania, which obviously has a spin-off to the economy. The other thing that I think is really important to note is that we have had a market improvement in our payment conditions. And when I talk about the number of contracts, we're up 2/3 over what we were prior to Act 89, and as a result of that additional money, those additional contracts, we're seeing improvements. Plus, we're seeing a number of big projects getting going. The Central Susquehanna Valley Expressway up in the central part of the state around Steel and Grove. We're seeing a lot of big jobs around 95. That's a very expensive roadway, an artery of the country that comes through Philadelphia. So all across the state, we're seeing work as a result of it.
As I pointed out a moment ago, I don't think you can drive 4 miles, 5 miles and not see road construction. And it's just literally, if you drive throughout the state, you have evidence right there visually of the work that's being done.
I agree, and I think one of the adages was you could always tell when you leave Pennsylvania the roads are much better at the border of the other states.
Right.
I don't think that's true anymore. I think we're seeing a pavement project and a pavement smoothing that is very, very competitive with other states.
All right. We got about a minute in this segment. Let's start it when we'll finish it up in the next segment. Okay. I want to talk about safety.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Road conditions are a factor in a lot of accidents. Talk about that.
Absolutely. One of the things we talked about, again, when the whole transportation bill was being discussed, was that this investment would improve safety, convenience, and quality of life. I talked about the convenience aspect with bridges. But last year, in 2016, we had the lowest number of highway fatalities since we started recording highway fatalities in 1928. Obviously, there are a number of factors, but certainly road conditions play a lot into that.
We're going to run to a break. I want to stay on this subject. This is very, very important because improving the road conditions has improved road safety, and that's important for all of us to get. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives.
We're chatting about transportation with our expert, Bob Latham. We get Bob in from time to time. Okay, I mean, this safety thing is unbelievable, and I want you to repeat it now. The lowest traffic fatalities since when? Since
1928, since we've been keeping records. And again, a number of factors there, but we're here on the eve of the holidays, and people are traveling back and forth, and we're just happy that more people will be home for the holidays that wouldn't have been before. Now, here are some other statistics. One of the things that cause, obviously, fatalities on roadway accidents is run off the road fatalities. They're down. Hit fixed objects. I mean, we have a lot of country roads, with trees and other things right on the edge. But we've done...
and deer that run out and stop.
Exactly. We've invested about a little less than $400 million in some of these, what we call unique safety projects over the last 4 years. And this obviously it's a factor in what's starting to pay off in lower deaths on highways.
Yep.
So we're also doing some of these low-cost things, the rumble strips on the road,
Yep.
a better guide rail. I mean, these are little things that can be done.
I'll tell you, those things on the side of the road, I don't know what you call them, but when you get off the road and the rumble strips and you hear them, you get back on the road. They are hugely important because it's easy when you're driving miles and miles and hours. You get a little bit to the right, you could run off the road and that jars you. These are, but look like modest improvements, but they save lives.
Exactly. Again, almost 500 of these statewide over the last several years, and it's having a big impact.
All right, how controversial are automated speed enforcement in work zones? You get some complaints about them. I think you're aware of that. And first of all, explain what they are. What are they?
Okay, basically it's a technology system, I guess sort of like radar, that if you speed through the work zone, you would get a ticket sent to you in the mail. It's very, very effective in Maryland and other states. And what you see there, what we've seen since they implemented it down there, is a real reduction in the number of fines. You know why? Because people are complying with the speed limit. Now, it is somewhat controversial in Pennsylvania, although it did pass the Senate and is now in the House. It was just reported out of the House Transportation Committee, and we'd like to see the bill
So you think it's going to pass?
We're hopeful it'll pass.
And the governor, have you had any indication from the governor about what he's likely to do?
I believe that the governor is in favor of it, and will sign it. There are people who have expressed concerns. They don't want to have such a system, and my response to them is it's a very, very easy way to avoid a fine. Don't speed through the work zone.
Speed limit. That's a good point. It's also dangerous to the people who are working there. We got to point that out.
Well, I mean, from our standpoint, representing the construction industry, that's what we're interested in. We have a dangerous operation, and unfortunately, we have people killed in highway work zones, mainly from distracted and speeding drivers through there. So what we're trying to do is have a system where at least we'll get the speed down, and
you're optimistic that when the legislature convenes, gets back after the holidays, that they'll take it up.
Our goal is to get this done before the budget season's over with. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, you don't want to get involved, tie that into the budget, I think. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in. This has been a wonderful update, and as we get into the new year, we expect you to come back and provide us with some more updates. All right, next week, guess what? We're going to have 3 of the state's leading reporters. We're going to take a look at the big stories of the week, try the year, not just of the week, and we'll look ahead to 2018. Have a great Christmas, and whatever holiday you celebrate, have a good one, and we'll see you soon.